Hello. Okay, Dark Harvest, a fantasy horror film directed by Slade and based on the 2006 novel of the same name. A novel that I've not read, but I've been meaning to for a long time. So, Dark Harvest is set in a cursed town where every Halloween becomes a brutal battle for survival. During the fall of 1963, the terrifying legend Sawtooth Jack rises from the cornfields and makes its way towards town, where gangs of 18-year-old boys stand ready to slaughter. So first of all, I love the setting and era in which this film is based, and I think they did a really good job at bringing that era to life, and it just feels like you're in a place that is very recognisable and that you can connect to. You know, it's 1963 America. It's a world and that I instantly recognise and feels real, but at the same time has that kind of otherworldly feel about it. And you've got, in the first, I'd say, 10 minutes, there's a shot of the cinema. And on the front of the cinema, you've got two names, Boris Karloff and Vincent Price. And for me, that immediately spoke to me. That was telling me what kind of film to expect here. And I think I'll come back to those two names later on in the review. But I feel like those two names really kind of sums up the sort of overall experience of Dark Harvest for me. The performances from all of the cast are pretty good here. Casey Likes, who plays our lead, Richie, I felt give a really kind of grounded, real performance. A performance where I was able to kind of connect, emotionally relate to the character and be able to emotionally connect to the character. And I found the characters to be quite likeable. And while you've got this kind of real, grounded performance, and this goes for every other actor, for every other character within this film, a lot of the performances do lean heavily into maybe the overly dramatic or almost hammy, but in a way that's actually serving the sort of the style and of how I feel Slade is bringing this story to life. Like, it works for the type of story and for the world in which they are creating. So it's almost like it's over exaggerated, and as a result these performances kind of mirror that fairy tale fantasy sort of feeling, that fairy tale fantasy atmosphere that I'm getting from this overall experience and just from this world that's been brought to life. And a lot of that is mirrored with these performances. I really liked the look of this film. There's some really beautiful, gorgeous shots, and they just ooze that kind of autumn Halloween feeling, that autumn Halloween atmosphere. David Slade does a good job at capturing that feeling. You feel like you're in 1963, approaching Halloween, and you can almost feel that kind of autumn chill. I just really like how he sort of captures that look and feel. I just think he did a really good job with it. And even though I liked the look of this film, I loved the cinematography in parts, I do feel like there's a lot of these moments which felt very stylized and perhaps a little bit too stylized, which ended up taking away from the horror and the creepy atmosphere that I felt like this film needed in most parts, in most moments. And so, yeah, unfortunately, as much as I liked the look of the film and how good a job that I felt David Slade did in capturing that kind of autumn, fall feeling, I do feel like that kind of stylized way of filmmaking that we get with this film does unfortunately take away from those creepy moments that could have been very creepy and effective, but were sacrificed for the sort of the look of the film, you could say. And that's just my personal opinion. You might disagree, but I'm going to use this particular scene as an example to sort of show what it is that I mean by it. And that is this one moment which I really liked, and it's when Jack Sawtooth goes down into this kind of like basement or this bunker, where all these kids are. The scene is quite creepy. It's quite effective at first, just the way in which it plays out, and the way in which the scene allows you, the viewer, to use your imagination. I really fucking dug this, because you don't really see what happens, and I love it when horror really allows you, the viewer, to use your imagination. You know, it's one of the most effective ways to scare anyone or to creep someone out. And so I really dug the sort of the setup at first, and and how this scene plays out with Jack Sawtooth going down into this basement to kill these kids. But that creepy atmosphere, that horror that this scene had up until that point, is destroyed by what I can only call, a rip-off of The Shining. So for those of you that have seen The Shining, you will be familiar with the sort of the wave of blood coming down the corridors. Well, you pretty much get the same thing here. And for me, it just came across a little bit pretentious and almost like, did we really need that? It just didn't quite work for me. And there are just moments dotted throughout the film that I do feel perhaps it's just a little bit too stylized and just takes away from that horror. It wasn't enough to take me out of the film, because I was still enjoying the experience and what I was seeing on the screen, but there were just a couple of moments that I just felt like really just took away from that creepiness that I felt like this film needed. So for me personally, the horror never really truly comes alive within this film, Dark Harvest. The creepy atmosphere is diminished by the sort of the style in which this story is brought to life. I like a lot of the ideas, I love the premise, and I just love sort of how the characters are brought to life, and they do a really good job. Even though the horror doesn't truly come alive and they don't quite capture that kind of scary, kind of creepy atmosphere that I was looking for, they do achieve this sense of dread that's running throughout the story. This is quite a sad and tragic story that I found compelling and that I was invested in. So when it comes to that horror aspect, it didn't really bother me that much. Like, yeah, it was like, oh, they could have done that a little bit different, or they could have done that a little bit different. There were a lot of those moments I felt, but overall I was invested with this story. And it's because a lot of the other elements, a lot of the other aspects when it comes to maybe the writing and the performances from the cast, I found just really compelling, and I was enjoying it. I love the design of Sawtooth Jack, and just the use of practical effects was fantastic. Like, you could see that this thing is there actually on the set, and that just adds so much to the immersion. It allows me as a viewer to be really immersed into the moment, and there are some really fun gory deaths, but at the same time going back to just that stylized look in some of those moments, is perhaps for me personally just a little bit too stylized, and it takes away from the kind of the scariness. Like, I just didn't find the film scary, but it is fun, and like I said, I just really dug the look of Sawtooth Jack and just how this thing, this creature, this entity was brought to life. And I do think that kind of stylized look of this film does really play into the sort of the type of story that they are creating, that they bring into life. So it's like, it's not a major gripe for me, because in part it does kind of work with that otherworldly fairy tale vibe that this story has got. So it does play into that. But for me, for a horror, for me personally, it does somewhat diminish that. But as a fairy tale horror, and with one that is really compelling, that has such a sad and tragic story, I think they do a really good job with it. I did just find this entire experience more dread-inducing than actually scary. I cared for the characters and just sort of their journeys. I found it to be emotional, but at the same time did somewhat lack the emotional punch in moments that I felt like that they needed to really have that kind of impact. But it's still kind of a sad story that reminded me in a way, there's there's just something about this story that has a bit of a Tim Burton feel about it as well. The story does explore a lot of real world deep themes like racism, greed, family, and there's this kind of religious undertone running throughout the movie, but it's not in your face. It's very allegory, like, you know, they're kind of almost like hidden meanings. They're there if you look deep enough for them, and this really does reflect my overall feeling of this movie, of this story. And that was, you know, this film has a tint of 50s, 60s horror movies running through its DNA. You know, those universal classic horror movies like Frankenstein. That's how this film felt. That's how this story felt to me. It really does capture the magic of those movies like Frankenstein, and I think they did a great job at capturing that essence of those old 50s and 60s horror movies, and that is why I like this film as much as I did. And even though the themes are there, that, you know, the themes they are touching on are there, I just feel like they really do a good job at honouring those kind of movies. Now, I'll be honest with you, I'm not 100% sure if that is intentional, but that's how it felt. And I just think it kind of goes all the way back to the beginning of this film with those two names on that cinema board, Boris Karloff and Vincent Price. And I just feel like if you've grown up watching those old classic Universal horror movies and you really enjoy those films, I think you're going to enjoy Dark Harvest a hell of a lot. I did. I really like this film. Yes, I've got some minor gripes with it when it comes to the horror, but I really enjoyed it, and I enjoyed how these characters were brought to life. I think Casey Likes does a fantastic job with his main character, Richie. And, you know, the story, the characterizations and all that are very much simple, straightforward. You know, it does have that air of Tim Burton about it. And again, it's one of the reasons why I was sort of compelled and kind of really sort of just immersed and sucked into this world and story. So yeah, they are my thoughts on Dark Harvest, and I will be giving Dark Harvest a 7.5 out of 10. So yeah, they are my thoughts on Dark Harvest. It's currently streaming on Amazon Prime. Have any of you guys seen it yet? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Did you agree or disagree with anything I've said? Then please let me know in the comments below, and let's get a discussion going. And if you've made it this far into the video, thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. And if you want to see future reviews from just some random Welsh geek rambling on, then please hit that subscribe button. It will mean an awful lot to me. Martin Scorsese's latest, Killers of the Flower Moon, will be my next review. I'm going to catch that Friday. I'm really looking forward to it. I'm really liking what I've seen in the trailers, and I am a big fan of Scorsese as a director. So yeah, looking forward to checking that out and bringing you my thoughts on Scorsese's latest. So yeah, thanks for watching. I really do appreciate it, and I'll be catching you guys soon.